Welcome to Solve, a SaaSOps live virtual event where we, SaaSOps professionals, get together on a Friday afternoon, 2:00 Eastern Standard Time, other times, other places, and we get to talk about SaaS and SaaSOps, and quite often Google Workspace. And a lot of my colleagues here over the last couple of years, we've talked about Google migrations, either if you're moving tenant, consolidating, you're merging with another company, or you've bought another company, you have to do a Google migration. You have to move two Google tenants into one. Traditionally, that's very much a copy and paste type of exercise. You create people new Google accounts, you have new Google Doc IDs, and you end up often with having some confusion about where people are and where their data used to live, because it is obviously a new copy. But thankfully now, through the magic of technology, there is a new and improved way of doing that. It's a more streamlined and I would say virtually instant and seamless way to do your Google Workspace migrations. And I'm very happy and thankful today to have Justin from Google to come on and explain to us about the new Google Domain Transfer Service. So thank you, Justin, for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thanks, Colin. Thanks for having me.
Everybody here everybody wants to put up a virtual hand who's done a Google migration. I know I've done a couple. Chris needs to put up both of his hands. I'm sure Dominic's done some. I'm sure they're all very excited about having a better way of doing this.
That I do not doubt. So I will begin my spiel by putting up some slides. And I guess per the comment before, I'm fine if people raise their hand and ask questions along the way. I prefer to not talk at a brick wall the whole time. So for sure, chime in with questions and I'll call with hands. Now let me see if I can figure out how to use Zoom and actually share my screen because I was able to get permission to use Zoom. However, I do not generally present with it.
Yeah, we would obviously prefer to be recording in Google Meet, but Google Meet does not have the grid view and such good presenter view options when you're recording. The gallery
live feedback.
There we go. Excellent. All right, sorry. Let me just get this to a spot where I want to present it.
And obviously, our Google our chat in the background does get very busy. Just you can ignore some of these people. They get a little bit like school children in class. There'll be a lot of chit chat.
Excellent. Okay. Can you see? Does it say domain transfer on the screen? So
yes,
Zoom suddenly hides everything from me.
Yeah, we can see that.
Which is quite frustrating. Okay, excellent. So, hi everybody. Again, my name is Justin Wexler. I am a strategic cloud engineer on our Google Workspace team under Cloud Professional Services. All right, so we're generally the team that our normal mandate is coming in and assisting partners while we're doing large enterprise non-Google to Google migrations. So there are traditional deployments from other software vendors over to Google Workspace. However, 3.5 years ago, I was invited to help operationalize, wow, I can't speak today, a service called Domain Transfer that was in a trusted tester alpha state at the time, which has now gone GA, which as Colin had summed up before, helps in these scenarios of Google to Google migrations, which I am sure, as everyone sort of chimed in, and let me see if I can pull the chat up here too, people have had fantastic experiences with. So I have a couple slides here. It's not a formal presentation. I can jump around and pull up other things as we need it. Everything that I'm going to talk about today is actually documented in our help center. I spent a lot of time making sure that the presentations that we give both to customers and that I hand off to sales teams are all effectively just prettier versions of what is publicly documented. So everything covered here, you'll be able to pull up, and I can give Colin probably has the link, but we can pull it up and you'll have all the nitty-gritty details there. So I'm just going to jump around through a couple of slides that I have prepared, explain the service, and then we can chit chat about what it means for you, and I can answer a whole bunch of questions. Excellent. Did that change slides and you saw it? Just confirming because I still can't see myself. Okay, awesome. So I don't think anyone here is really confused as to why one would do a Google to Google migration. The customers that we find generally fall into these two buckets, but one is really just a subset of the other. So M&A activities, company A buys company B, and they want to, who is on Workspace, and they want to move that company under company A's environment, right? So that's generally the use case we get. But there's also organizational changes, right? So M&As that have been done in the past, or departments have performed shadow IT and have decided to spin up their own Workspace environment on their own. Suddenly that gets found out, and now we don't want those things running amok anymore, and we want to bring them under the governance of a single tenant. So these generally the two cases that we have to deal with, and I'm sure there's more, right? But I think these are the biggest ones that we deal with, particularly on domain transfer. I don't think, as Colin mentioned, anyone should be too unfamiliar with the problems that come with traditional migrations. I think someone in the chat was writing about managing file lists that are too big and managing user lists, right? The problems with Google to Google migrations, at least in an all or nothing situation, right, is falls into these four categories, right? It's painful and it's disruptive to pretty much everybody involved. It's highly complex. It might not actually be the most complex thing to do, but there's a lot of moving pieces, right? You're managing lists of who's moving in what wave, right? Where their data is, what's the system it's coming from? Is it different than this? Do I have enough bandwidth to move it from there? It takes a lot of your time just to do all of these things, particularly when we're talking about moving data, right? If someone's got terabytes and petabytes of drive data that you're moving, or objects that you're moving to drive, you have to start doing those migrations months in advance, right? And you're doing rolling deltas as you go, because people are obviously in the system still working on their projects, and you want to make sure that all of that gets picked up, right? And then the last one is it's expensive, right? Some of the tools on the market, for example, Google has Google Workspace Migrate. It's free to use, right? As long as you're on an accepted SKU, but you have to deploy the infrastructure for that, right? So you're maintaining server hardware, or if you're going with a third-party provider, you might be paying a license for what's happening there, right? So including the time into that scenario, it becomes a very costly and expensive process, not only for the folks pulling the switches, but the users on the ground, because you have to communicate to them, hey, you're in this wave. Some of your colleagues may not be in this wave. How do you guys work together? What's going to be the experience like along the way? And it's a pain in the butt. So what we have instead is, I'm missing the slide on this, but we have Google Workspace domain transfer, right? This is our solution to this. And you know what, let me very quickly, did this change slides to a different screen, or was it only a tab?
Yep.
Okay, it went back in time, right?
Different tab, yeah, there we go.
Yep, excellent. All right, so now I can just do my spiel. This is easier. So what we're talking about here is Google Workspace domain transfer. And we are merging two Workspace environments together with zero business interruption for our end users, and without data leaving the Google environment. And those of you, again, who are familiar with this and have only lived these pain points over and over again, can see that there might be some benefits that come along with this. For example, without data leaving Google, we are only effectively changing ownership of those particular entities. That cuts out all of the backfill type of work that you might have to do, all the time complexity that comes with that. And the biggest one that we find, well, this is one of two that we find the biggest win, is that the entities are left intact. And one of the biggest complaints we have with regular migration is, hey, I'm recreating all my drive files somewhere else, and all of my links have changed, and all of my references to those links are broken, and I have to go and find them. And how do I get the mappings from my old to my new, right? Because all we're doing is changing ownership of these files, these entities are left exactly alone. So that's users, that's accounts, that's application settings, that's drive objects, that's the links that come with them, it's GCP IAM permissions, all of the things that effectively you would have to deal with because you're recreating an identity somewhere else and making copies of things, go away under this model. Along with that is content sharing, right? So you would be obviously have to recreate those documents somewhere else and then reshare them out to the people who should have access to them. But sort of there's the flip side of that equation, right? For a lot of big consulting firms, right, they actually get a lot of information shared with them, with their particular user account, right? So that is actually retained here too, because those documents remain the same. You don't have to then go hit up all of these other companies that you work with and say, hey, can you share back with me the files that I don't have access to because I'm on a new account? Operational complexity is low. Everything that you have to do for a standard migration, you have to do here, at least in terms of planning what your policies will be between two particular organizations. But in this case, you have one cutover date, and most of the work that you actually have to do is just configuration in Google Admin and those conversations around policies and settings, right? We have a couple of tasks that you have to complete in order to get ready to perform this transfer. But they are exceptionally less cumbersome than all of the other work you would normally have to do for a traditional migration. Last two fantastic benefits. These things, as Colin said, are pretty fast. We publish times in our help center, just to give you a sense of scale. For a 5,000 user a 1,000 user migration takes about less than an hour. 15,000 users, give or take, is under 2 hours. And then I think we quote like around 30,000 users might be in the 3-hour range, right? So this happens really, really snappy. And there's no downtime. So while we are performing this migration, users are still using the product. Okay, they are operating within Google Workspace applications while the transfer is happening. Now, there's an exception when it comes to some super admins and delegated admins, but all regular users, as if nothing is going on in the background. We have done a lot of these since my time. When I came on board, I think we had maybe done 12, 13. So I've been pretty closely involved with all of these. We have a lot of repeat customers now, to the point where for the ones that are eligible, I get told weeks in advance of a M&A happening that it's going to happen, and then I should be quiet, but also get prepared. So a lot of customers have started to really work this into their M&A workflow. And it makes sense, right? Because if you can get this done and plan ahead accordingly, you don't have to also deal with the other challenge that sometimes comes along with migrations, is the fact that you might have to provision, for whatever reason, those users that you've acquired into your destination environment in advance. They might need access to some tools or systems that can only be accessed from that destination account. In a normal migration, it's okay. People are managing 2 accounts. And that's fine. But then you have that situation where you maybe want to retain stuff from that source, but they already have that destination account. Which one's actually going to be the one that wins out? Where does the data come from? So we simplify that here. We've got some quotes from some customers who have done this. Colin has done this. So Colin could be twice. Yes, that's right. And I know we've done it. Yeah, we've done it twice with you. And so Colin can attest.
Let me just interject with a little story. We did one of the first ones, I think, when it was still a beta, and they did warn us that we wouldn't be able to do any admin functions. Part of it, you have to relinquish your super admin control. And we were warned that we could not have any administration rights to the domain for about 6 hours. So it's like, oh, we'll start at 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time in the afternoon. And I told my team, sort of stand down. We won't be able to do anything. Maybe in a couple of hours we'll find out that we can start managing accounts again. I was like, I'll make my lunch. I didn't even have a chance to finish my sandwich, and I got an email from just in the team about 16 minutes after they started to say they completed our transfer of 250 accounts and about 4 terabytes of data, I think.
And then you bragged about it to me while I was doing a traditional.
I did. Yes, yeah. You and Chris were probably knee-deep in file lists and Google Sheets, and it's like, I just did a domain transfer in 16 minutes.
Well, I'm glad you brag about it, because that's what we want to hear. Sorry that you weren't able to, whoever the other person wasn't able to be doing this at the same time. I feel your pain. How does it work? I kind of explained briefly at a high level before, but just to sort of spell it out with a very basic diagram, what Google Workspace domain transfer will do is move any secondary domain and its associated aliases from a source environment into a destination environment. We call these the transfer domains, and they will become secondary domains of the destination once this is all said and done. Okay. Now, chances are you want your primary domain of your source environment to move over with you. And so we need to make that an eligible domain for domain transfer. And what we introduce is this concept of a placeholder. Any random domain you have lying around collecting dust. It can be a subdomain, doesn't really matter. As a part of the process, you will promote that and perform a primary domain swap in the environment of the source, which will then free up your current primary domain to become a secondary domain, and then it becomes eligible for the transfer. Any entities associated with those transfer domains, we call them transfer entities, and they will move along with the transfer. And that's all the stuff you know and love and care about. Your users, your groups, your mail, your shared drives, your resource calendars, all that fun stuff, right? When we move those users, we will move them under an organizational unit that you create in the destination called the transfer route OU. And so what will effectively happen, right, is if you have some complex structure under the source, you say, hey, put it in this transfer route OU in the destination, and at transfer time, those users will move into their corresponding OUs like they were in the source. And we give you choices. There are some configuration that you can choose along with domain transfer and how that happens. But that's sort of the brief how this works. What's nice about that is because these are domains that exist in two separate workspace environments and we move them over, you don't have to worry about things like naming conflicts, right, or clashing of anything, because your source user, even if they have a destination account for them, they're going to be on two different namespaces. So when they move over, they will just coexist together and you don't have to worry about any kind of conflict. Now, it's not all sung in, roses and butterflies and whatever else is fancy. There's a couple of things to worry about here, are limitations of the product. The first, and the one that trips up the most people, or at least takes the most time, and because it involves multiple parties sometimes, are the licensing front. So the tool does not move licenses. What we require is that there are enough matching licenses in the destination to support the incoming users from the source. Now that has to be set up and done prior to us hitting the go button and initiating the transfer. Users will be assigned the same license that they had in the source in the destination. So how that plays out is if the source and the destination are on two different SKUs, generally what happens is we will upgrade that source SKU to whatever the destination is sometime before the transfer happens to make them like for like, so that they move over, and we make sure that there's enough licenses in the destination. Now, I won't get into the hairiness of this, because we've had conversations like, what if there's a reseller, what different reseller for the source and the destination? What can we do partial domain licensing in the destination so that we can keep people on two SKUs? That's dependent on what's actually supported. But at the end of the day, our requirement is like for like. How we get there is a discussion of the process. We don't support identity merge or deduplication. So that scenario before where, hey, we had to provision those users in the destination ahead of time, and now we're moving their primary accounts over. We can't solve for that. We don't know what accounts match to what human. So we can't just point them together and say, go ahead and merge. That would be incredibly complicated. So that is a process that has to happen separately, either before or after domain transfer completes. It's all or nothing. So we cannot do partial transfers or what we call divestitures, right? Whether it's one user or half of an organization. So we can only move everything over except for what we call a placeholder admin, which is the one super admin that we leave behind in that source environment so that you still have access to it. We also don't have an undo button. So once you say, Justin, we're clear to go, we're going, right? And as soon as we hit that button, we can't undo it. The process is going to complete. It will run to completion, and that will be the end of it. From a user experience perspective, and then I'll stop for questions because I'm sure there's a whole bunch building up somewhere. And Colin, I don't know if you can see the chat's going, so I don't know if it's easier to go through the chat or chat. But from a user experience perspective, during the transfer, end users, business as usual. Use the tools as you were, no business interruption, no need to do this during off hours. In fact, we don't execute transfers in off business hours for the region that we're running this in. We do most of our transfers just right in the middle of the day. Source and destination admins will have their access revoked for a portion of the transfer, as Colin was mentioning before. And we will communicate, through email It's the best sort of route we have for what's the status of the transfer. When the transfer is done, we don't automatically assume that source admins should get their privileges back in the destination. And so we will only re-provision destination admin access at that time. It will be a manual task for the folks in the destination to say, hey, okay, we want these source users to have their admin privileges back again. You can resume pretty much every operation of Google Workspace after the fact, except for the deletion of users. The reason for this is that we run an audit process for about 5 to 7 days after the transfer completes, and we need at least the users that existed at that time to still be present. You can suspend, you can rename, you can move, you can transfer ownership, you can do pretty much everything else you want other than do that. The call out here and the details are in our help center, but as you all know, when you move someone between OUs and Workspace or you change settings, the thing comes up and says, hey, this may take 24 hours to propagate. Somewhere in that range, these changes will take effect. The same thing sort of happens here. So there's a couple of propagation or temporary delays that happen as soon as the transfer is complete that usually resolve within 24 hours. The easiest and most visible example is that Google Chat, when users move over for a period of time, it's about 24 hours, each company will see each other listed as external. There's a background process that runs to go and sort of refresh that label. And after that, that will go away. So that's just an example of some of the cosmetic issues. From a transfer perspective, or what actually happens when we hit the go button, here are the stages of what we do. First thing we do, we revoke admin access. Second thing we do is we start to move the entities and we start to update some drive permissions. Transfer entities will finish moving. And as soon as those entities are done moving, that's when we give access to the admins back into the system, right? So these quoted times on the right can also be, it's the time of the transfer per the number of users, about estimate. These are source users, but that's also the length of the time your admins are locked out of the system, right? And that's you can consider those two things the same thing. Once the transfer is complete, we continue doing some background drive permissions that are really nothing that is user facing. And we do some validation audits that again take 5 to 7 days. And we just ask you not to delete users as a part of this. Excellent. I'm not going to go into the scope of stuff because that's super lengthy. So I'm going to stop there right now. And we can talk about domain transfer, how it works. And then we can go into a little bit about like what the process is like for doing it. But let's stop and talk about the product.
Yeah. I know there's a whole bunch of questions. Rose, I think, has her hand up first. I don't know if you want to unshare your screen, Justin, then we can see everybody.
Yeah, let me do that. Hold on. I thought I hit it. Oh no, I hit pause and not stop because that's a thing. Okay.
There we go.
Sweet. Faces again.
Rose.
Hey, Justin. Number one, super excited about this. I think the thing that I'm most interested in is eligibility. So yep. I knew that this was like a thing that might be coming for a very, very long time. And even now, I think it's unclear to people, like, do you have to be an enterprise user to use this? Obviously, like you have some minimum license counts, but like what does eligibility really look like? Like, can any of us potentially initiate this process and do it for any kind of Google to Google migration that we want to do?
Sure. So let's clarify that situation. So first of all, this domain transfer can only be executed by cloud professional services. It's not the position I want to be in, but unfortunately, just due to the state of the tool and the product, we need someone on the Google side to push the button and to run parts of the process, right? So we are unfortunately a middleman in this product. Now, there are product managers working on the long-term roadmap for this and what it might look like to get us out of the equation. But those are pretty distant timelines. Now, to answer your question, so because professional services is in play, we can only scale running these transfers with the amount of people that we have on our team. And our team is quite small for doing this. As of when I was working with Colin, I think it was just me. And for 2.5 years, it was basically just me. We have grown our team to at least double-digit numbers right now globally. And so we are working on getting more people into the mix to be able to handle these transfers and execute them. But we can only scale so far. And so we updated our eligibility requirements for 2022. We've actually removed our licensing minimums. So there are no more licensing minimums required to use domain transfer. However, the organization, one of the organizations that is going through the transfer must be classified on the Google side as a select or enterprise customer. A bit of information that you can get from sales. We needed to restrict our funnel somewhat, and also professional services is supposed to only be working with, our mandate is to help the enterprise plus, not enterprise plus license, but the enterprise and up customers. And so we had to draw a line somewhere. So right now we've removed license minimums. Our eligibility in terms of a transfer hard requirements are still there. But as long as a customer is classified as select or enterprise by sales, then they're good to go, right? And our goal there was to, one, expand our funnel a little bit. Like we were able to, that opens the door a little bit wider than what it used to be with those license minimums. But also it lets us handle the use case of, hey, we're working with a customer over here that has a very large GCP footprint, right? And maybe we're trying to get them more into Workspace, but they don't necessarily classify for these license minimums, right? So we're able to sort of open the door a little bit more there. But that is our current state of eligibility.
Excellent. Tristan, if you want to ask your question next. Hi.
Thanks. Justin, you and I worked together a long time ago, actually, when this was probably
Tristan.
Pre-alpha. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you again. Yeah, look at all these, names are coming back to me now. It's been a while.
My question is related to lead times, because ProServe still has to be rightfully involved in this process. Please don't commit to anything you're not comfortable with, and no one record anything related to lead times. But what can customers who do qualify expect if they start to engage in this process in terms of like waiting for a go live date or scheduling with you?
Sure. So Tristan, back in the day, we probably told you, come back next year and maybe we'll have an answer for you. We are much better than that. Our lead time is actually now down to 2 quarters into the future. So we are right now, we're in Q2 now. We are quoting Q4. I think we're about to tick over our quote into Q4. So we've cut that time down tremendously. So no longer go and wait. Our response is submit your customers for an eligibility check, which is a required part of the process to make sure that the actual transfer can proceed, completely separate from customer eligibility. Put them in our queue, right? And then so that will put them in the list. We operate on a sort of first come, first served basis. So whoever pops off the top of the list, who's ready to go, will get the next resources. And again, that's now being measured Q3, Q4 timeline at this point. The incentive I'll put in there is that some customers move faster than others to contract. So if we find that we have someone who was interested tomorrow or yesterday that suddenly got their contract with PSO done in 3 days, and we have a resource that becomes available and there's no one else to work on right now, we will pop them to the top. So our quotes are generally a worst case scenario. The caveat, or not the caveat, but the clarification that I need to make, because sometimes it confuses folks, is that the quote we give is for when we will start working on the project. We will begin the engagement, have our kickoff meeting, discuss stuff. That's not, here's the date we're going to do the transfer. The transfer will happen at this particular point in time, right? That has to be figured out as we get rolling. But that's at least when we can have someone from professional services ready to start engaging.
That is a much better prognosis than I thought, than I expected. So that's really helpful. Thanks.
You're welcome. Yeah, we're working on it. That was one of our big focuses of last year.
Yeah, and if Q4 is already getting booked up, I need to have some conversations with Google, because I probably have a few that need doing this year. I have to try and squeeze them in. Jake, your question.
I was curious, what does this look like from a logging perspective? So when, like, let's say if you were bringing over a drive file from your other domain, does that emit a unique event in the log of your destination domain saying this came over from this domain, or does it show the original creation date, or does nothing happen, et cetera, et cetera?
You will see, so it's a good question. So you will see activity from our service account from this tool in the destination saying that all of these files have been moved into the environment. You'll see basically a record of everything that the migration tool is doing. What you won't get is what is not supported, which is all of your legacy audit stuff from prior to the transfer. Everything that was in the source environment, all those audit logs and things like that will not move, right? So you'll have that source environment with those records still left there. But I forget our robot account. I forget if it's called Google Workspace domain transfer or something. It's in our help center, but we have a robot account that you'll be able to see and filter by, which will have all the actions that it took for the transfer process. Yeah.
Okay, so in other words, you'd be able to see that your robot account moved the file over to the destination domain, and it'd still be owned by the same user at the end of the day, but you wouldn't have any metadata saying when did that user create it in the original domain, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, open the floor to other questions. There weren't any other little cartoon yellow hands put up. There must be.
You probably can't discuss this, Justin, but it came up in the chat, so I figured I'd bring it up.
Throw it out and let's see what happens.
How much does this cost?
Cool. I can discuss this in terms of non-dollar numbers because it will vary by region and it's just easier to talk about that. So PSO, professional services, has what we have our own SKUs, right? Our own offerings that you can purchase from us. So one transfer is the equivalent of one of our Workspace advisory SKUs. So if you've ever worked with PSO before, one transfer is one SKU. So the one-to-one, that will equate to some dollar amount depending on your particular region. We will do up to 12 transfers in a particular engagement. So the minimum is one SKU, maximum is 12 SKUs per transfer. It's relatively inexpensive, I think, compared to any other way that you're going to do it, both in terms of savings for your sanity and for your wallet. But I would follow up with your sales rep or the folks in PSO to get the actual dollar amount for that SKU.
Yeah, as a customer, I'll say that the initial dollar amount may seem high, but when you divide it among, you know, the number of users you're moving, the quantity of documents, the lack of disruption, it really does make sense. Unfortunately, we don't have any coupon codes. You can't put hashtag solve at the end of your order form to get 10% off, unfortunately.
No, not yet. We'll see what we can do about that, Colin. Yeah, so that becomes a decision, right? And we have the discussion when customers come to us and say, I've got 20 of these things to do. And we go and look at them, right? And one environment has 4 users and one environment has 10,000 users. And they go, well, why am I going to pay this for these 4 users? And users is kind of a bad proxy for it as well, because you can have 10, 15 user organization that you've acquired with boatloads of drive data, right, per user that would just make the migration painful as it was there. Or you can have that critical account that owns a Google developer relation, not developer relations, like a Android developer console account, right? Or that key YouTube channel, right? Like stuff that really needs to be maintained by the business. And at that point, doing it just purely based on a user count proxy is not, it's a business decision effectively, right? But we'll call that out, right? Generally, when I see requests come through and they're very small numbers, I'll push back and be like, hey, just so you know, these are really tiny. Maybe you want to consider other migration methods for these, depending on what's going on in those environments.
Who else has a question? Any others? I know there's been a lot of chit chat in the chat. Dominic, I think you had a question. There we go.
I mean, can I have Google Voice or could I have had Google Voice? I've seen the alpha bundle or the alpha document over the years as a partner. So
cool. So let me put this up because I had this waiting in the wings. So that has changed if you haven't seen it in a while. So to answer your question about Google Voice, it used to be a blocker. It was a hard no. It used to be a hard no as of 6 to 9 months ago. It is now not a hard no, but it requires you to, 1, agree to have all of your voice data right from your source environment by our engineering teams. And then 2, cancel your licenses in the source environment. So it is now unblocked, but that's the requirement that we have in order to get it done. We are working with the voice team to at least allow for the porting of numbers from the source to the destination. It wouldn't necessarily get reassigned to the same user because they wouldn't have existed at that time, but we're at least trying to keep the numbers that you had within your pool and have those moved over.
Yeah, porting between Google is currently also not supported. So that's something. If you can get that to work, we can have it for everyone. That would be awesome.
One of the complexities of this product is that it touches so many different services who all have their own roadmaps and things that they're working on. So it's a lot of fun. But the voice team has been great, and we are working with them to see what we can do to make that experience better. So these are the updated transfer requirements that must be met. This is completely irrespective of whether or not a customer is eligible to use the process right now. The big one that's like really the only blockers we have are these hard limits around maximum users and the 600 domain and domain aliases. That's a Workspace limit. And the new one is with the recently launched client-side encryption. If the source has ever turned that on, it is ineligible for the transfer since it is unsupported, and that would be a not fantastic scenario.
That's good to know. Make sure I don't play around with it. One thing I'd like to ask about is the Google Advanced MDM.
Sure.
Obviously, a lot of companies utilize that. Is there any possibility, like Google Voice, where working with the Android team or whatever, that won't be a blocker in the future? Obviously, that makes the transfer the only thing that would impact an end user.
Yep.
If it was to be disabled and then re-enabled, everybody's got to redo their personal devices. Yeah.
So we are working with that team too. Voice and MDM are the 2 teams that we are working most closely with in terms of supporting functionality. In fact, there is testing going on right now around particular scenarios. So I hope to have a better answer around that this year. A lot of this stems from, if you've been keeping up on our MDM news, which I don't know why people would sometimes, but it's we have been moving over to a different policy application. I forget the name, but there was an old Android policy application, and now we have a new one that's rolling out this year. A lot of the issues with this stem from that legacy one that has not yet been revoked from the ecosystem. So we are working to figure out how to work around that right now. So that's sort of the origin of why this is an issue. But short answer to your question, Colin, yes, we're actively working with those teams to try to figure something out.
All right, that's good to know. All right, if there's no other questions, do you want to go through and explain a little bit more about how things are done?
Yeah, let's do a brief. I think I have that
because we've got to maybe say 10 minutes left.
Yeah, so let me fly through this. So we've talked considerably about the product itself, how it works. We've talked through eligibility, how to get into the mix, right? So what ends up happening process-wise? First, we scope your transfer. So assuming your customer is eligible and assuming you have known transfers that you want to execute, we need to know them in advance because we need to check your eligibility. You will have your Google rep submit an internal form to our team that submits those transfers for an eligibility check. So we do scoping on that, and we determine, are they eligible? If they're not eligible, what are the blockers from that particular list? And then we push it back and say, hey, if the customer is willing to work around these particular things, then we can proceed forward, right? So we will determine which transfers are in scope. We will assign a number of SKUs to that, and then we will kick off the PSO contracting process. You will get put in the queue. When you pop to the top, everything's done. We will start. We start with a kickoff. It's a 1-hour meeting, which is effectively everything we talked about today, but loads deeper. Bears repeating, everything that we talk about in that kickoff meeting with all the details is in our help center. So you can feel free to read ahead on that. So we'll do that kickoff. We'll gather stakeholders together. We'll talk through the particular scenarios of the transfers in scope. And then we enter our preparation phase, which is where we spend 95% of the time. We have two sets of tasks that you have to complete. The first are called dry run blockers, and the rest are called pre-transfer tasks. Now, they're all technically pre-transfer tasks, but dry run blockers block a dry run. A dry run is effectively an execution of domain transfer without actually performing the transfer. It gives us on our side a bunch of debug statements that say, we're good to go on these particular bits of criteria, and we're not good to go on these. The two tasks that we have for dry run blockers, the first is an admin verification. So we want to make sure that you are a super admin in control of your environment. So we'll do a quick screen share to verify that. And then we perform, or the customer will have to perform, a domain verification process. Now, domains get verified obviously in Google Workspace, but because we are moving a source to a destination and we want to prove that the destination environment owns the source domains, there's a separate tool. It used to be called the Google Search Console, and now it's called something else, but there's another Google tool which lets you as a super admin verify the source domain on behalf of the destination. So that's our second sort of security check to make sure everything's good. Once that's done, we can execute a dry run. We'll get back a list of debug statements, which effectively tell you which pre-transfer tasks have not been accomplished. And then we go back and forth. Colin will say, hey, I did the thing for Vault. And I'll go, okay, hold on, let me check. And I will check. I will check. And then I'll see it come up and we'll move on to the next one. And we'll just track those until we have a passing dry run. We require a passing dry run 24 hours in advance of the production date. Now, the production date always becomes a sticky issue. We can't choose a production transfer date until we have our first dry run executed. So we need those dry run blockers completed so that we have visibility into the action items that are left for you to execute. And so we can have confidence in the date that we choose. This is important for a couple of reasons. One, we want to hit the date. We don't want to keep kicking the cans on behalf of your users. Two, this is a shared service. So we are limited on the humans on our side, but we are also limited in the days and number of executions of domain transfers that we can run a week. So we need to be very confident that we are not sniping a date from another customer who might be aiming for that, just to then not be able to follow through on the date. So we get our first dry run, we can then choose our date, lock it in, and then target that. The day before the transfer is set to go, like I said, we need a passing dry run. And then the day of the transfer, we set a time. You'll give us permission to execute, usually in advance. We hit the go button, Colin goes to get lunch, and then I tell him that the transfer is done before he can actually eat the sandwich. And then we have that period of 5 to 7 days afterwards to just not delete users. Otherwise, fair game for everyone there. So that's sort of the whole process in a very compressed time frame.
I really think that eating lunch and not being able to finish lunch should be like one of the line items in the spreadsheet that you give us that we have to tick off when it comes to doing the migration.
I'll put it in yours from now on.
You can definitely put that in the marketing material.
So that's everything in soup to nuts. The call out for the whole process are the pre-transfer tasks that I didn't call out, right? A lot of them, the ones that we document are the ones that are absolutely required to execute domain transfer. It's some of the things we talked about when we talked about how the tool works. So it's creating a placeholder admin, it's creating that placeholder domain, making sure that placeholder domain is made to be primary. Things like that we, the tool, require in order to go. Number of licenses in the destination needs to be greater than or equal to the number of users in the source, right? So we'll check for that. What we don't check for are the other pre-transfer tasks that you should be doing or your customer should be doing on their end, right? Auditing between the source and destination policies, checking for allow lists, domain-wide delegation service accounts that need to move over, right? All of the Gmail compliance, right? All of the things that don't transfer, we don't transfer policies and settings. So those conversations that you would normally have to reconcile those two environments for a traditional migration, you will have to handle. We will not be able to check for that. So that's on your end to everyone else's end to handle that, right? And that also includes out of scope, at least for us. We can talk through the scenarios, but differences in identity platforms between the source and the destination, right? Handling what happens when those users move over and they need to be able to authenticate, stuff like that.
Yeah, I know marketplace applications It's something that's, they'll get moved over, but the domain names can be different. What the Google OAuth or the single sign-on, and you need to sort out the user accounts on the application that you're connecting into. There is some work. It's not 100% seamless, but it's a lot easier than doing a traditional migration.
Exactly.
All right, we've got 4-ish minutes left. Any final thoughts, questions? Is this groundbreaking for everybody? This is, for those, I know the pain that a lot of you, your careers are based around doing migrations, and it's what you do for the last couple of years since I've known you. I've done a number of traditional ones and these new ones. And it's great that Google, now allows us to move data when, it doesn't really need moving because it's all in the cloud. I've done some migrations in SharePoint, Office 365, doing domain moves, and it's quite ridiculous and ironic that you're moving data from one Microsoft SharePoint bucket or OneDrive bucket to another SharePoint or OneDrive bucket, where in reality the data shouldn't need to be moved, just needs to be redirected to where it is owned and where it belongs. Jake, did you have one last question, or is that a new hand or an old hand?
New hand. One last question. That now blanked on me. Wonderful.
Are you asking about the OU thing?
No.
That's a good question.
Sorry.
Now you do yours.
Okay, I remembered. I need to get it out before it goes away. Prior to the actual execution of the migration, is there any ability to just have a global diff of what's changing? I realize would be quite the large file, but is there anything like that or comparable to that?
Unfortunately, no. There is nothing. I wish we've had this asked from several customers. There's no way to sort of export the configuration of a source and compare it to the configuration of a destination. There's nothing like that exists other than going through and sort of seeing what's there, unfortunately, which is my really crappy answer. The light at the end of that tunnel is I know that there is a new PM that just has come on board to look at things that fall under that bucket. Very fresh, but at the present time, no, there's nothing, unfortunately, there to be able to help with that.
Thank you.
Okay. And I'll ask one last question.
Sure.
Obviously, at the moment, it's all or nothing. It's the entire domain or nothing. Do you think there might be any possibility of doing just OU migrations? Because obviously sometimes just a part of a company or an org might get spun off or moved somewhere else.
We are having talks. So the answer is yes. We are having talks about what a divestiture version of domain transfer might look like. I guess I can put it to this audience, right? If you know of scenarios of divestitures, they're usually a little less common than the M&As. Obviously, they happen all the time. So we're looking for data around how often this happened and what they look like. So we are looking at that. The current running model would be less around OUs, and we would more select a particular secondary domain, right? So users attached to a domain, and we would do it that way. Is I think the running idea at the moment.
That's easy. So, you would just have to rename those people that are moving to use the secondary domain, and then just move them. Yeah,
correct.
That would work quite well. So, all right, excellent. This is all great stuff. Thank you for everybody who's attended, all of those who are on video, and all of the little named squares that are just here listening that probably won't show up in the video. But thank you very much, Justin, for spending an hour with us, talking to us about this new service. I'm sure this is very exciting for everybody, and hopefully they'll all get budgetary approval for those professional service SKUs.
There you go.
Be able to take you up on some migration help. So I'm going to press pause here. Thank you very much, everybody.